Welcome to the third and final part of Chapter 11. In this portion, we will discuss negotiations. Negotiations is essentially a process of conflict resolution. It's a process in which two or more parties try to engage in discussions that help them reach a mutually acceptable agreement. Negotiations typically happen when the parties have some level of interdependence. If I can get what I need without you, I'm not going to engage in negotiations with you. And so typically negotiations occur when the parties cannot accomplish their tasks without each other. So there's some level of interdependence. The parties typically experience some type of process or goal conflict that they need to resolve in order to reach a mutually beneficial agreement. Both parties are motivated to reach an agreement. If I don't care about the conflict, if the issue is not important to me, I might never negotiate. And so the parties are motivated to negotiate and believe that they could potentially influence the other party and believe that they can reach a mutually satisfying agreement. So negotiations are likely to occur when the parties have some level of interdependence, when they are motivated to negotiate and believe that a mutually beneficial solution exists. It's important to understand that negotiations begin long before what we typically think about as negotiations. When we think about negotiations, we see two parties sitting around a table discussing. But negotiations typically start before that, in the investigation and preparation stage. In this stage, we're trying to gather as much information as we can about the potential demands that the other party is going to make. We have to clearly articulate to ourselves what is our bargaining zone, meaning what is our red line that we are not willing to cross. What is the lowest price we're willing to accept, or what is the highest price we're willing to pay? We have to know that in advance so that we know when the negotiation has reached an impasse. If we do not clearly identify the bargaining zone for ourselves, those red lines, so to speak, we might end up making concessions that we really didn't intend to make, and the conflict resolution or the negotiation will not be as favorable as it could have been. So in the first stage, we prepare to collect as much information as possible, both about our bottom lines, our needs, and both about what we expect the other party to insist on. Only once we've done our homework and clearly articulated to all members on our side what our framework is, then we can enter the bargaining phase, which is the actual presentation of demands. Each party presents its demands, explains, rationalizes, and there is a back and forth discussion that hopefully leads to an agreement. But of course, not all negotiations result in an agreement, and sometimes we have to reach an impasse and go back to the drawing board and reevaluate the situation, reconsider our bargaining zone, our bottom lines or red lines, and enter the negotiation a second time. Of course, not all negotiations will be successfully resolved. When we negotiate, there are some negotiation strategies that are considered desirable, especially in North American culture, right? And there are lots of cultural differences in terms of what's appropriate in negotiation and what's important in negotiations. And we've discussed some of those in the cross-cultural value discussion earlier this semester. In North America, it is considered ethical to disclose information correctly and honestly. Only selectively disclosing information is considered unethical. When the negotiators highlight only positive information and downplay or completely fail to mention negative information, that is not considered ethical. Negotiators are expected to avoid misrepresentation of variables. Deception and lying is also considered unethical in terms of negotiations. Making false threats or false promises and inflicting direct or indirect harm in the process of negotiations are also considered unethical. Some mistakes that individuals might make in negotiations beyond ignoring cross-cultural differences are listed on this slide. One is a fear that we may be conceding too much, which makes us more difficult to negotiate with. We do not want to appear overly accommodating, right? We discussed that in the approaches to conflict resolution. And so we might make major blunders by being too firm or too rigid in the negotiation. Another mistake is selective attention and other perceptual biases. We've discussed perceptual biases extensively when we discussed individual perception and attribution. For example, stereotyping or the halo effect or the horn effect are perceptual biases. If we only pay attention to variables that confirm what we already want to do, this applies to selective attention. And those can negatively influence the outcome of the negotiation. The winner's curse or overconfidence refers to a situation in which the negotiator doesn't have all the information or has misconceptions regarding the correctness of his or her position and enters the negotiation with an approach that I am right and the other party is wrong, and therefore I am very confident that the negotiation needs to go my way. And that can create some communication barriers and make it more difficult to reach a mutually beneficial resolution. We've discussed cultural differences. It's important to understand these cultural differences. For example, in some cultures, it's appropriate to display emotions and even throw a mock tantrum, pretend to be offended in the process of negotiation, whereas in other cultures, this is considered very inappropriate. And so we have to be aware of cross-cultural differences. And you can take an entire course on negotiations, and a big portion of that course will be dedicated to cross-cultural differences. Negotiations is a difficult process as it is, and when we throw cultural differences on top of it, it can make the process even more challenging. Another difficulty in negotiations is escalation of commitment. Escalation of commitment refers to a situation in which we have already invested time and money into one course of action. And so it is almost an embarrassment for us to admit that this course of action is not working and reverse it. So sometimes people have an attachment to courses of action that they've already spent a lot of time on or a lot of resources on, and they're going to pursue this course of action or this process of negotiating a specific item, even though it is not the most beneficial to them. So this is an example of escalation of commitment. And the last challenge in negotiations is when we view negotiations as a fixed pie, a zero-sum game where there's necessarily a loser and a winner. And there are different ways in which we can negotiate and try to expand the pie. And this is what we will talk about next. This chart from your textbook identifies 4 approaches to negotiation. I would argue that these 2 approaches, active avoidance and open subordination, are not necessarily negotiations in the sense that we understand negotiations. If the outcome is not important to me and I'm openly subordinating to the other party, I'm yielding to the other party, there is no need to negotiate. This is like the accommodating conflict handling style. Also, active avoidance, when there is no interaction between the party and there is a refusal to negotiate, this is like the avoidance conflict handling style. In neither case do we need to sit down at the table to negotiate. In one, because we don't want to negotiate, and in the other one, because we choose to yield to the other party and give them what they are asking for. So I will not discuss these 2 when we discuss negotiations, and rather focus on trusting collaboration and firm competition. In firm competition, the outcome is important to me, but the relationship is not as important to me. And this example, firm competition, is also very often referred to as distributive bargaining. Distributive bargaining or firm competition is regarded as a zero-sum game. The outcome of the negotiation is very important to me, but I don't really care about establishing a long-term relationship with the other party. For example, if I'm trying to sell my used car, however much I can get you to pay is my win and your loss. And I'm imposing my solution, I'm imposing my price, I'm forcing the issue. If you don't want to pay my price, I will walk away from the negotiation and not sell the car. And so in this situation, negotiation is viewed as a win-lose, zero-sum game, where one party's win is the other party's loss, and there is not much emphasis put on building long-term future relationships. This is very similar to the forcing conflict handling style. Distributive bargaining, also known as firm competition. The trusting collaboration, also known as integrative bargaining, is very similar to the collaborative approach to conflict resolutions. Here, we are trying to reach a win-win situation by expanding the pie. Very much like the dealership example that I gave earlier. When you're buying a car from a dealer, you are not just negotiating the price. The dealer can broaden the pie. The dealer can make this very different from a zero-sum game, a fixed pie. The dealer can broaden the pie. We're not just talking about the price of the car, but also about service, free car wash, extended warranty, added features that can be put on the car with no additional cost. The dealer has the opportunity to sweeten the deal, so to speak, expand the pie, and approach a negotiation more as a cooperative process of problem solving. This is the price that I need you to pay for the car. But I want you to walk out of here happy because I want you to come back to the dealership to get your car serviced. And I want you to come back to the dealership when you want to buy another car. And so I want to reach a win-win. And so I am expanding the pie. I am looking to collaborate, integrative bargaining. In this situation, the parties are open to considering additional issues, not just the price. And they are more cooperative and approach a negotiation as a problem-solving process rather than a conflict. So this is very similar to the integrative approach to conflict resolution, collaborative approach. Integrative bargaining, also known as trusting collaboration. Of course, integrative bargaining can be very time-consuming, and the parties have to be interested in establishing a long-term relationship. If one of the parties or neither party cares about the long-term consequences, we are not likely to get to trusting collaboration, and we are more likely to get stuck with firm competition. So how do we resolve conflict? How do we successfully negotiate? There are a few tips. One is to focus on people. People have emotions, different values, different backgrounds, and different viewpoints. If we think about those and we factor those into the negotiation, we are more likely to be able to collaborate, integrative bargaining, trusting collaboration. We need to pay attention to people's interests, not just the positions or the demands that they make, but rather what are those demands and where are they coming from? Why is the other party making those demands? For example, in labor management negotiations, why are labor unions making the demands that they're making? Because they want to ensure job security for their members and they want to ensure a living wage for their members. And so are there things that we can get from a labor union in terms of concessions, maybe more flexibility in job descriptions? while we concede on the things that are very important to the labor union. So are there ways for us to reach a win-win rather than focusing just on hourly wages? If we engage in brainstorming in the preparation stage and generate as many alternatives as possible and look for mutually beneficial solutions, we are more likely to be able to engage in trusting collaboration. But we cannot rush. We have to dedicate the necessary time because, much like the integrative bargaining, collaborative approach to conflict resolution, this process takes time. And the final recommendation is to use standards and criteria, objective data. Maybe rely on the advice of experts. This can help us eliminate emotions and frustration from the process and help the parties more effectively reach a resolution. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about this chapter.